Okay, בוקר טוב, חודש טוב. We are in our last shiur for this summer. I see Elul as the new year because that's the way that שנת הלימודים is working. So that's the way I operate. So Elul already belongs to תשפ"ה. So that's the last shiur for the summer, and it's the last shiur. I think it's the fourth one. Or the fourth one on Rav Kook, and I guess he's the longest that we had, but for a good reason. Even now, you would say we only scratch the surface. We really only are scratching the surface here. Much more deeper to go, but we have to go on. There are more gedolim we have to speak about. So we'll finish. That will be our last shiur of Rav Kook and the last of the summer. And Bezrat Hashem, I am going out for Miluim on Tuesday and for 40 days. And Bezrat Hashem, thank you. And yeah, she's the real one that is Behatzalacha is Pnina. I will just be relaxing there.
I hope so.
Hashem. And I will see you in Mirza Hashem again on Elul. We'll send, of course, the details. And just I think that we all agree that we'll continue this specific series. Okay, so I want to speak today about the time of Rav Kook in Yerushalayim. We had one series, it was 2 meetings that were about Rav Kook before making Aliyah, and then we spoke about Rav Kook period in Yafo, in which he was already also very much engaged in dealing with the new reality in Eretz Israel, but still he had a lot of time to write. What we will deal about today is period in Yerushalayim. There is much more what we may see as national activity, but much less writing. I guess that it just come one on the expense of the other. In another way, we can see it as the period in which he was trying to realize what he was dreaming about and envisioning in his period, in his time in Yafo. But of course, as always, with this type of a dynamic personality, obviously it's not only the shaped thought of Yafo now being carried in Yerushalayim, but he's also reshaping, rethinking, reevaluating what he believes and how we should operate. But however, in order to understand better his time in Yerushalayim, we must go back again to the time of Milchemet HaOlam HaRishon, the First World War, and he is, in the beginning, he's in Switzerland. He went to Chutz La'aretz, both for, we may say, Zionist activity. He was not, I think I said it many times, he was not a Zionist member in the political, narrow sense. But when I say now Zionist activity, I mean in the very broad sense of activity for the sake of the settlement in Eretz Israel. And also because both he and his wife needed some medical treatment that they couldn't get in Eretz Israel, which at the time was very much behind in these type of areas. So he is going to Switzerland. And then, as I guess the rest of the world is caught by surprise when First World War breaks down. How do you say? Breaks up. Yeah, breaks up. Thank you. So, breaks up. And he's caught there. He cannot go back because he has Russian citizenship, and Russia is at war with the Ottoman Empire, so he's not welcome back in Palestine, in Eretz Israel. And he's for a year or two, he's in Switzerland, and then he's receiving a request from Kahal Machzikei Hadat in London. It's a well-known, I have never been to London, but I'm being told by people from there that that's a well-known community in London. So Kahal Machzikei Hadat, or Machzikei Hadas, I guess, and it becomes the shul rabbi of this community, but basically he's becoming a very important rabbinic personality in England, which took him into some arguments with the very known Rabbi Hertz, that some of you may still have the opportunity to daven with his Chumashim. So he translated the Chacham Shei Torah, and before Art School came into town, that was more or less the only game. So a very well-known figure and important rabbi. However, he was much more, how would I say, patriotic towards the English government, while Rav Kook didn't in any sense saw himself as committed to the English government. And so, for example, Rabbi Hertz believed that yeshiva students should be recruited to the English army. Rav Kook fiercely opposed. Or another example, Rabbi Hertz believed that a soldier that is in the English army during the First World War can carry out any activities during Shabbat, not only in combat, but also in training. He had a complicated, sophisticated halachic argument for that, which is beyond our scope. Rav Kook, again, very strongly disagreed and was not shy from publishing his disagreements with Rabbi Hertz. Now, it's not up to us, of course, to evaluate tzadikut or any other level of great people. However, I think it can be said that when coming to halachic arguments, then Rav Kook was more, he came from more, I would guess, strong Talmudic background. And when you read the discussion, it's I would say that it's very, very interesting to read the back and forth. Obviously, Rabbi Hertz was also somewhat maybe intimidated by Rav Kook coming into England and suddenly beginning to give psakim in what should be seen as the public area, which was more or less under the auspices of Rabbi Hertz. So this is a very complicated and sensitive topic. We have a beautiful description of the meeting of Rav Kook before coming to England, still in Switzerland, with one of the students that will become later one of the very important students of his, Rav David Cohen. Rav David Cohen, better known as the Nazir. And let's read the description. It's a beautiful one. Source Aleph. It's from the introduction to Laoרות הקודש. Laoרות הקודש is the book that Rav David Cohen would later publish from the writings of, we remember that Rav Kook is not writing in a systematic way. So he has these huge notebooks that he's always writing in. And Rav David Cohen, with the agreement of Rav Kook and with his approval, would go through these notebooks and would collect writings and would set them according to topics in a much more philosophic, systematical way. And this would be called Laoרות הקודש, very, very important books, ספרים, to understand Rav Kook's thought to this day. And the introduction to Laoרות הקודש, Rav David Cohen writes the following: לפני 27 years ago, and it means 1915, אני בשווייץ בבאזל, so he's in Basel in Switzerland, עסוק בלימודי הדעות והפילוסופיות לתקופותיהן. So he was studying in the Beyazil University, and he was studying philosophy because he was looking for the truth. מלא צימאון ושקיקה לאמת. I am full of thirst and longing for truth. בייחוד האמת הישראלית, and especially the Israeli truth, Jewish truth. הגיעה אליי השמועה מהרב שנמצא אז בארץ זו מזרחה. And then I heard that Rav Kook is in the east parts of Switzerland. פניתי במכתב. So I sent him a letter. Can I come and visit you and try to see who are you? And see what do you have to offer to me as someone looking for the truth. ובקבלי תשובה, that's a way that you could only write at the beginning of the 20th century, right? Nowadays, I'm looking for the truth. I think it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And he got an answer and he decided to go to him. אחרי טבילה במימי הריין, so he makes it טבילה, right? He go to immerse himself in the Rhine River before meeting Rav Kook. מצויד ב'שערי קדושה, it's a Kabbalah book from Reb Chaim Vital, מלא ספק וחיקיון. He says, I am going to Rav Kook and I am full of doubt. Is he really the man that can offer the truth? so doubt, ספק, but also חיקיון, expectation. עשיתי את דרכי להרב. בערב ראש חודש אלול תרע"ה, so in אלול 1915, באתי אליו, מצאתיו עסוק בהלכה עם בנו. So רב צבי יהודה was there also, and they were discussing הלכה. נשא בשיחה על חוכמה יוונית וספרותה. So I can only guess that Rav Kook heard that he's coming from university, so Rav Kook tries to get into a talk about Greek philosophy, ספרות יוונית. שלא סיפקה עוד נפש היודעה ממקורותיה הראשונים. So the Nazir is very candid, he's very straightforward with us. He says, you know, I spoke with Rav Kook, but I was already in university, and back then, it's amazing, it's also a change. Nowadays, you can learn philosophy in university, and you'd never learn Greek. So you'd never read Aristotle or the other Greek literature in the source, which is 70 years ago, it would be considered something that is completely, it's something that is impossible. Nowadays, you have people, not in Eretz Israel, but in other places that are learning, no, I think about Jewish studies. So there is professor to Gemara that cannot read Gemara without Sotenstein. If it was not something that I can see in writing, I wouldn't have believed, but it is clear. So it's the way that the world is going, unfortunately. But back then, so Rav David Cohen, who learned in university, I guess that he learned Latin and Greek, and he was able to read ממקורותיה הראשונים, he was able to read Aristotle in the source. Rav Kook, with all of his advantages, etc., he learned in Volozhin. You didn't learn Latin in Volozhin. And he didn't know Volozhin, he didn't know Greek, and he was not able to, I hope that I am not, putting any dent in his figure. He was not able to read it in the source. And Rav Nazir and Rav David Cohen is very straight here. And he says, I was not impressed with what he had to say about Greek philosophy. However, he says, נשארתי ללון אצלם. It was already late, so I had to stay and sleep over. So, נשארתי ללון אצלם, על משכבי לא שכב לי, but I couldn't sleep. גורל חיי היה על כפות המאזניים. Now I'm explaining. He says, my soul felt that my life is on the stake here, is on balance. והנה בוקר השכם. I waked up early in the morning, וישמע כל צעדים הנה והנה. So, and I'm hearing steps. So he's sleeping in one room, but he hears steps on the next room. ברכות השחר. Rav Kook began his tefillah. And he was saying the ברכות השחר. And תפילת העקידה. בשיר וניגון עליון, with a special ניגון and a song. משמי שמי קדם, זכור לנו אהבת הקודמים. All this is from the korbanot. I don't want to say what is going with the korbanot nowadays. It's gone the same way as Greek and Latin, I guess. Excuse me?
It's been sacrificed.
It was sacrificed, exactly. It was sacrificed. V'akshiv, now he says, I am listening to the way he sings the korbanot. והנה נהפכתי והייתי לאיש אחר. I became a different man, different person. Now, it's amazing. Yesterday night, he spoke with him about the truth, right? About philosophy, but he was not impressed. But now he hears the way that Rav Kook is singing. No, I'm not speaking about, it's not Yamim Noraim. It's not Filat Ne'ilah here. What do we speak about? The Korban, Shachrit, a weekday Shachrit, not even a Rosh Chodesh. A weekday Shachrit. No, maybe it was. It says it was Erev Rosh Chodesh. I don't know. Maybe it was Rosh Chodesh. It doesn't matter about the Korbanot. And if something, then when Filat Rosh Chodesh is long, then the Korbanot is even more designated to go in the way of sacrifice, as it says. So amazing. Rav Neria, another student of Rav Kook that would join later, Rav Neria writes in his Sefer, he alludes to this introduction from Rav David Cohen, and he says, Rav Kook was very bad at singing. He wouldn't be able to sing right even if his life was in stake. So obviously, it's not that Rav David Cohen hears here and he says, wow, what a beautiful singer. He hears the soul sings. And that's what would make him a student of Rav Kook, a disciple, really, of Rav Kook from this day on, to the rest of his life. שערי קדושה, אחרי התפילה, after the תפילה, מיהרתי לבשר במכתב, I wrote a letter back home, כי יותר מאשר פיללתי מצאתי, I found more than what I was hoping for. I was hoping to find the truth. But what I found, מצאתי לי רב. I found a master to guide me in the path to the truth, which is more important than someone just giving me, handing me this truth in an envelope. ושערי קדושה ושערי בינה, the gates of holiness and the gates of wisdom, נפתחו לפניי. Now, I don't think that we can fathom even what he was feeling when he was lying there on his bed and hearing Rav Kook chanting from the other room. I'm trying to connect to this experience, so I think about myself in תפילות ימים נוראים in the yeshiva and seeing the Rashi yeshiva, seeing Rav Amital and Rav Lichtenstein Zecher Tzadikim Livracha. It was a special experience to see them standing there and davening. Rav Lichtenstein in a very advanced age, he would still stand up the whole of Yom Kippur and wouldn't sit down. So there were things that were impressive. However, it seems that was something that was completely from a different world. Amazing. Just reading that, I think, is teaching us a lot. However, Rav Kook is also writing in Switzerland. And he writes something, I translated it into English. I wouldn't read the whole thing right now because it's too long. And I want to be able to learn some more things now. But I translated it because I wanted you to be able to read it maybe later. And what he writes there, he calls אורות המלחמה, lights from the war, lights from darkness. And what he's trying to do, and it was challenging back then, maybe it is even more challenging to us in our situation as of this year, תשפ"ד, 2024. And we said earlier that Rav Kook was trying to find the lights, the sparks, the divine sparks, in every phenomena in the world. He was a great believer. If it exists, it means something of the divine is there. Otherwise, there is nothing in this world. There is no independent Satan that is fighting against God. Everything can, in the extreme, would be the sitra achra, right? The other side of the divine, but it would always be the other side of the same coin. There can never exist anything in the world which is not somehow empowered by Hashem. So that means that even what he is feeling there in Europe in 1915, millions of people getting killed for what seemed to be for no good reason. And in that, First World War was different even from the Second World War, because in the Second World War, people felt that they are fighting for ideals. In the First World War, there were no, I think that you all know the history. Yeah, there was some Austro-Hungarian successor that was murdered. You know the history. It was very difficult to give good reasons why so many are being killed. And Rav Kook is trying to find a divine spark in the war. Now, again, I wouldn't read it from inside. I would say very, very briefly, and I'm obviously grossly oversimplifying and doing a great misservice to Rav Kook. But I think it's important even to say, Rav Kook says, when do you come into war? When new ideas are trying to grow, and they are not able to find their way peacefully. So in the end, what you have, the earth is shaking in order to enable them to burst and to get out into the world. Now, it would have been better to be able to come to this conclusion in different ways, but the way that the world was created is that the thesis and the antithesis, in order to create the synthesis, in order to advance, the thesis and the antithesis have to wage war on each other. It is better when they wage war on each other in books, in pamphlets, in letters, but the human condition is that many times it gets down to swords and to iron, fighting iron. And in order to bring redemption, he says, you need to shake the world from the old ideas, which are wrong, which are blocking us from growing. And if the shackles can only be removed through war, then yes, then war is divine. And he says the individuals that are being killed without, now this is very good on a very, very, very up-level scale. What do you say to them? Again, millions of people that were killed in the ditches, we can read, again, descriptions. He didn't need descriptions from books. He was just next to he met with people that came back from the war, and he had the experiences from firsthand. So how can you justify that? And he says that is right. The individuals nispim belot tzedek. It seems that is unjustified. That there is no chas v'chalila, like there is no judge. But he says that can be equaled to the death of the righteous. When the tzaddikim die, he says, and that atones, or that can again advance the world. So again, that is my interpretation to his words. You can see them later. But in a sense, you need Moshe Rabbeinu to die for Am Yisrael to continue. Because as long as Moshe Rabbeinu is there, they cannot grow as individuals. You need to remove the rabbi sometimes in order to enable the next generation of his students to come to full growth. And in the same way, so that is now why the Rebbe has to die, because that's part of the advance of the world. In the end, it's even for his own sake, because his sake is also part of the continuation of human life, human civilization, of Torah, if we speak about, again, the Torah teacher and the tzaddik. In the same way, he says, the people that die without justice in the war, they are part of the advance of the whole world. So they are like the tzaddikim that die in order to enable the rest of the world to advance. Now, let that sink in. It's very, very difficult. And again, I'm not doing justice. In 5 or 6 years ago, we had a series of 6 or 7 meetings, not in this shiur, but in another, in a Hebrew shiur, when we learned לאורות המלחמה. It was in one of the מבצעים in Gaza. I can't remember right now, maybe צימאון. And we tried to learn לאורות המלחמה, and there we, as I say, we dedicated 6 or 7 meetings, and even then we didn't get the whole book. So obviously I'm only giving you one part, but I think that's the basic idea. However, he says, again, very interestingly, he says, I also quoted that, what I said now is more or less in source bet. Now I'm quoting for source Gimel, explaining for source Gimel. He says, you know why we have lost our state, the Jewish state? He says, obviously we were forced out of it. We were expelled. But we were forced, but there was inner will in us being forced. What was the inner will? We didn't want to have a kingdom in a time in which, in order to have a kingdom, you need to act in a barbaric way. So if you wanted to have a kingdom in the time of the Romans, in the time of everything that went around here in the Middle East, you needed to act otherwise you won't be able to survive. So the Jewish people decided, now again, it was not a conscious decision, but it was an inner decision that was later expressed by an outer force, that it would be better for us to lose our political power and not have to rule in a period in which you have to act like a wolf. That's what he says. And then he says, but now, Baruch Hashem, that the world is advancing, then we may have a state without having to have also, he calls it, a talent of the wicked. Yaakov had to hold to Esav heel, that is, to hold some of his wickedness in order to survive. Baruch Hashem, he says, the world is advancing. And after World War I, there is the League of Nations now, and we are in a better world. So now we can begin to act towards establishing our own state. He believed very, very strongly that we would not have to fight the war in order to receive the Jewish state. And he wrote a letter to Rav Meir Bar Ilan, the son of the Netziv, that was an editor of a newspaper. He was a very important person in the Mizrahi. The Bar Ilan University is called after him. He was a very important person in the Mizrahi, Rav Meir Bar Ilan. And he was editing a newspaper. And in the newspaper, there was an article about the Arabs of Eretz Israel and how we need to fight them, etc., etc. And Rav Kook wrote a very strong worded letter to Bar Ilan, to Rav Meir Bar Ilan. And he wrote to him, you must not use such terms. We must not raise hatred between the Arabs and the Jews, because we want to establish a state here in a way of peace. That's how we came for peace. And we establishing a state would be for the benefit of the local Arabs and also for the benefit of the all nations of the world. There is no need to get into struggles. And that is a great vision. We can, to this day, I think we can be inspired by it. However, and unfortunately, I think this is one of the places in which Rav Kook, that he was seeing so long into the future and not necessarily seeing what is sometimes under our nose. And as we know, after his death, during his lifetime, I hope that we'll be able to say a few words about it. In 1929, Praot Tarpat, it was already beginning to get very heated between the Arabs and the Jews. He was still trying to hold to the idea that we, as many others. Yes, he was. We B'ezrat Hashem will speak about that. I'm just giving the idea, his idea about the international relationship of the Jews and the Arabs. He was still trying, yes, to hold to the peace very, very strongly. And he was niftar. He passed away in 1935. So he didn't live to see not what was going in Europe, but also not, he didn't see the Milchemet HaShichur, the independence war, which of course we had to fight in order to survive here and to establish the state. Okay, in 1918, World War I has already been finished, but Rav Kook is still stuck in England. Why is it? So there are a few reasons, but it seems that the main one is that he was invited by some of the rabbis of Yerushalayim to come to Yerushalayim and to be appointed, as when he left, he was the Rav of Yafo and the Moshavot and the new settlements. But now he was invited to become the Rav of Yerushalayim. However, Yerushalayim was an extremely complicated place, not as today, which is completely peaceful. Back then, there were very different camps in Yerushalayim. You had the Kanaim, the extremists, and the fanatics, and you had the Metunim, and you had already a strong also presence of Mizrahi people, and the Mizrahi people, and some of the more moderate Haredim, we may say, led by Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, a very important posek in the beginning of the 20th century. They were inviting Rav Kook to return to Jerusalem, which is now, of course, I forgot to mention that, which is now, of course, is being controlled by the British. In First World War, the British conquer Eretz Israel, Palestine, from the Ottoman Empire. They have the Balfour Declaration, and then they get the mandate from the League of Nations to establish a Jewish national home to the Jews in Eretz Israel, in the states, in the lands of Palestine. So that's obviously unfathomable. That's something that they couldn't even imagine just 50 years before, that such a turn would happen. Rav Kook sees it as clearly the bells of redemption that are ringing very, very, very loud. So he wants to become the Rabbi of Yerushalayim, but he wants to have as wide of a basis as he can. Excuse me. Okay. So he wants to have as wide basis of a coalition as he can. So right now he's waiting in England, and he's writing letters, trying to establish as many connections in Yerushalayim as possibly he can get. however, he is very troubled because the Zionist movement, which is now being seen by everyone as a representative of the Jewish people, it's just got from the British the best approval that you can get. However, the Zionist movement declares that it has nothing to do with religion. הציונות דבר אין לה עם הדת. That's their declaration, and they hold to it very, very proudly, and they believe that by that they would be able also to recruit the religious people from Eastern Europe, because if they say they have nothing to do with religion, it means they are natural. And if they are natural, then the Haredim can join. That is, Rav Kook believes it's a big mistake. Because a movement that has nothing to do with religion cannot be joined by people that are deeply religious. And you have to sell a completely different sale, Rav Kook believes, not because it's a sale, because it's a truth. And that is that we should see the establishing of the state of Israel as the realization of the visions, the prophecies of the Nevi'im. But the Zionists would never agree to that, because obviously that would commit them to many, many things. There is a whole bundle if you believe that you are the realization of the prophets. So the Zionists would have nothing to do with that. And Rav Kook decides to establish an organization that he would call Degel Yerushalayim. He's still in England. Degel Yerushalayim. And Degel Yerushalayim was supposed to be an organization that would overgrow the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement would become an arm of Degel Yerushalayim. That's what he believed. Why? Because Zion, is about the physical body. If you remember what he said about Herzl, about Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. So Zionism is about building the body, which is necessary and important. But the people of the spirit cannot join it because the body does not speak to them. So Degel Yerushalayim would be about the spirit and the body. And the body would be a part of building the complete form of Yerushalayim. And he says it's even in the Tanakh, you can see that Zion is always about the body and Yerushalayim is about the spirit, about the Beit HaMikdash. Now, the idea is beautiful and the vision is great. And again, if it would have succeeded, then who knows how many Jews would have been saved? Who knows how Israel would have looked like? But Rav Kook was a man of a great vision, but less of an organizational power. And he established this organization and he began to send letters and to recruit funds, raise funds and recruit people. He's one person. No, but he had a few people that believed in him. However, you can immediately understand that the Zionists would be opposed to this new movement because they do not want to be, the whole thing seems to be surrealist, but they do not want to become a part of the Degel Yerushalayim laid by the Rabbanim, right? That's the whole thing that they were rebelling against. So they obviously were opposed to this movement. Even the Mizrahi was opposed to this movement because it saw it as a competition. The Mizrahi was part of the Histadrut HaTzionit. So establishing a stand-alone organization is a competition against the Mizrahi. Agudat Israel saw the whole thing as just another attempt to tempt them into joining the Zionist movement in a different name. Right? That is like now we want to recruit the Haredim and say, I am not the head of Tzal, now we have Tzabal, and you would come and it's just the same uniform and the same weapon and do the same things. They didn't see it as really a stand. They thought it's only a face about. So everyone was opposing to this movement. Now, Rav Kook still maybe stood a chance if he would stand and fight against those that are smirking his movement. However, and I'm skipping all of the, I think, interesting sources, but immediately to source A, which is a personal letter. So that's a letter he writes to Rav Zalman Pines. Kfar Pines is named after Rav Zalman Pines. He was, again, another follower of Rav Kook, and he was the head of Degel Yerushalayim. He was appointed by Rav Kook as the head of Degel Yerushalayim. And he was begging Rav Kook to put all of his weight behind the movement that he himself has created. And that is what Rav Kook is writing to him. So say that's a letter from 1919. Anochi eineni politikani. I am not a politician. ולא אוכל להתגדר בעניינים של פירוד הדעות. It's not my personality to become an opponent in questions of disputes and to fight for or against a specific opinion. הנני רואה רק את הצד הטוב שבכל הופעה, ואליו אני מתייחס באהבה ויקר. He says, you want me to attack the Zionists. I mean, if you want to explain why someone should become a member, a registered member of דגל ירושלים, not of the Zionist movement, you have to explain to him what is wrong about the Zionist movement. Says Rav Kook, I cannot do that. When I am looking at something that on a hofa'ah, on a phenomena, I can only see what is good at it. It's a beautiful letter. He writes that almost in pain, right, to Rav Pinus. He says, I'm not a politician. I'm not able to look at something and to say that is bad. I can only look at something and says, this is what is good in it. ועל כן אני מקווה שגם מתנועתה של אגודת ישראל ישב וטוב יצמח לבני. It says also, I cannot attack Aguda, because there is also a lot of good in Aguda. So I cannot attack them as well. So I cannot attack from the left, I cannot attack to the right. I'm only being attacked from both sides. You can already understand what would happen. And if that's not enough, he continued to write to Rav Pinus. Rav Pinus asking you, why don't you continue at least to agitate, right, that's the word, agitate for our organization. He says, כעת הפסקתי את הפעילות האגיטציונית, that is his agitate, אגיטציונית לשעה. He says, for the time being, I also stopped to agitate here for דגל ירושלים. Why? מפני שבאי כוח המזרחי באו ועוסקים באנרגיה בשלהם. He says, many Mizrahi activists are now working here very strongly. I don't want to hurt their activity. All of that is beautiful. But you can understand what I mean. We live in a real world. If you cannot stand and say what is wrong about the others and what is good about you, then you would not be able to sell your merchandise. That's in the end, that's the bottom line. So, and he says again, that's it's so beautiful and it's also sad. And he says, אינני חפץ שתהיה בנו התחרות הגרנית. I don't have to have a competition with me, but you are in competition. He says, no, I don't want to have a competition. I want to be above. That's what he wanted to establish. And he says, אקווה, I hope, כי ההמון הגדול ביושר טבעיותו יכיר סוף סוף את ההכרח שבתנועתנו, וכל האגודות השונות יכירו, כי איננו באים לחזק ולנסה את כל היד העסוקה בבניין ובתחייה, וכולם יעשו לנו אוהבים. He says, I don't want to fight against anyone, because I hope that everyone will understand that we are needed, because we give the spirit, so everyone would love us. And now it's not a psychological need to be loved. I don't think that was the point. It was a real belief that what he is saying is not partisan, that what he is saying is above the parties. But it was just too high and too abstract, and the whole organization fell apart. Because no one, Rav Kook was not, if the founder would not put his whole weight and would say, you should register to Degel Yerushalayim, you should deregister from the Zionist movement and register to the, he would never be able to carry, to move himself to say such a sentence. You should leave Agudat Israel and register to Degel Yerushalayim. He would just say, you should also register to Degel Yerushalayim because we give the spirit to everything. Beautiful, but it was just not enough. And in 1920, in the end of 1919, he comes back to Eretz Israel, and the whole movement just disappears and dissipates. And again, we can only wonder, but I don't think that he was able. He writes it here. He writes it here. Maybe that's a trade that you have to do when you are such a man of vision. Then it's always the combination of vision and organizational powers, chazon v'maaseh, vision and deed, is difficult. But when you live in such high realms, I guess that having your feet so firm in the ground is difficult, and that was not the type of personality that he was. And again, חס וחלילה, that is not, I hope that it's understood, it's not a critique in any way. We speak about someone that is really in the seventh sphere. But you cannot live in the same, meaning, if you live 200 years from now in your visions, it is very difficult to act in this world.
I think we had Alexei on Yerushalayim. Maybe that's almost like his vision, like
incorporated in the
it's Alexei on Yerushalayim, like it sits above as an.
That's beautiful. I mean, I hope to be able to say a few words of that about that as we would conclude here. But when speaking about his legacy, I think that so much, it's not by accident that so much of his writings remain in manuscript for so long, and so many of his ideas are still we are only now begin to extract and to mine these very rich fields of thought that he left to us, because he was so far looking and far envisioning that we can only step by step, we are moving in very baby steps. So you're right, and some of it, you may say some of it only on Yom Yerushalayim. In 67, we began to realize some of his ideas and dreams, and many of them are still very, I would guess, this by nature, it looks to us that it takes very long to accomplish. In 2019, he returns to Eretz Israel. He still did not receive the appointment to the Rebbe of Yerushalayim, because he works still on trying to widen his support. Then a tragedy strikes, and his daughter, Esther Yael, falls from the stairs. She was, I think, 10 years old, maybe a little older, and she falls in the stairs, and she's very badly injured and dies a few days later. And then in 1920, he receives the Rabbanut of Yerushalayim. He was not able to accept the agreement of the Kanaim. And Reb Chaim Sonnenfeld, about whom we spoke if you remember, 2 months ago, more or less, to the last of his days, Rav Chaim Sonnenfeld would call him, the rest of Rav Chaim Sonnenfeld, he died earlier, he would call Rav Kook the Yaffoer Rebbe, the Rav from Yaffo. And he would not accept his appointment to the Rabbanut of Yerushalayim, and he was the more moderate of them. And the more Kanaim, after his death, the more Kanaim, when Rav Dushinsky would come from Romania, I think, to Yerushalayim, and he came in an old age after the death of Sonnenfeld, and some of Rav Kook followers asked Rav Dushinsky maybe to meet with Rav Kook, or to try to bridge the gap. And Rav Dushinsky said very, very pointedly that he didn't come to Yerushalayim in old age in order to then become an epicurus. Oh, wow. Yeah. So that was the situation. Now, Rav Kook published a book named Laoרות in 1920, again, allocated from his writings by his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, but also approved by him. And this book published into the whole world, but also completely made the gap, the chasm between him and the fanatics completely unbridgeable. Because one very extreme example in Laoרות was that about the sport that the young Jews are doing in Eretz Israel. And that's in source Vav. Can I take the 10 minutes that we began later? And so I apologize. So we would finish Be'ezrat Hashem at 10:10. ההתעמלות, source Vav, an amazing paragraph from לאורות. ההתעמלות שצעירי ישראל עוסקים בה בארץ ישראל, so sports, that the young youth of Am Israel are engaging in Eretz Israel, לחזק את גופם, to strengthen their body, בשביל להיות בנים אמיצי כוח לאומה, to become strongful children of the Jewish nation, היא משכללת את הכוח הרוחני של הצדיקים העליונים. It gives power to the righteous, the highest righteous. העוסקים בייחודים של השמות הקדושים were engaged in the highest Kabbalistic kavanot of the holy names. Can you imagine what would be the reaction of the fanatics hearing that the highest tzaddikim are being helped and supported by the youth that are playing football, soccer, maybe for you? So how can you even begin to imagine? What does he write here? So he explains very long, at length. He says, Avodat הקודש מעלה את השכינה, this work of holiness, התעמלות, right? מעלה את השכינה מעלה מעלה. So it elevates the divine presence. כעלייתה על ידי שירות ותשבחות שאמר דוד מלך ישראל בספר תהילים. It's like reading תהילים. אלא שעל ידי הכוונות העליונות עולה הנשמה הפנימית, ועל ידי המעשים המאמצים את גוף היחידים עולה הרוחניות החיצונית. It says there is an inner soul within each one of us. When we say Tehillim, then the inner soul is being elevated. There is also an external soul, belongs to Am Israel as a nation. And when the Jewish nation is becoming more in shape, I guess, then the external spiritual of the Jewish nation is elevated. Because we are becoming a better people, a more firm people, a more in shape people. I think that nowadays we can have a better understanding of what he says. Because we have a better understanding of the relationship, even in the individual, between his fitness and his ability to... We know that there is a connection. Now, Rambam taught us that 800 years ago when he says, Nefesh Bria Beguf Bari, right? A healthy soul resides in a healthy body. But that was forgotten over 800 years. And for the rest of it, most of Jewish faith belief was that when the body increases in strength, it loses in spirituality. That's what Rabbeinu Bachir wrote in Chovat HaLevavot. It comes one on the expense of the other, no? The body comes, it returns to what we spoke about many times. But Rav Kook believes that in Eretz Israel it is different. You need to have a healthy nation, not only a healthy body, a healthy nation. So yes, sport is part of that. We just ask them, please do not play ball on Shabbat. The fanatics went ballistic over this problem. Now, they wrote pamphlets. They excommunicated Rav Kook. And they explicitly quoted, they said, again, I don't have the time, but that's just one example. There are many, many examples. It was very easy for me just to copy-paste because it was online. In So Zayin, that is Iton Kol Israel. That's a surprise, right? But Kol Israel was not Kol Israel from the radio. It was the newspaper of the Haredim in Yerushalayim. האם לא די לו לרב הזה במה שהוא מבקר את החינוך המזרחי על פני החינוך הישן ומשתתף תמיד בבחינות? Is it not enough for him to join the מזרחי? Now he needs, הוא רוצה עוד לסחוב את בנינו ובנותינו אל הספורט ואל הפריצות של הכדורגל? Now he wants to carry our youth, our boys and girls into the פריצות, right, of sports and football, להוציא את הילדים מבית חייהם. Okay, I don't have to continue. You understand. Now, there is such a gap between what he writes and what they read. And in a sense, I have to say, they are right. Right? In a sense, what are you saying here to the youth? That playing football is like saying Tehillim? Is that what we want to teach? But on the other hand, I hope that I was able to explain to you what he meant. But the difference between the worlds that he is living in and what they are reading is now so stark. It's just, it cannot be bridged, not only because there were personal enmities, and there were. That's a small part of it. They are now from different universes.
Still today.
And that's right. To this day. That is very right. To this day. The Imre Emet, that's the Gur Rebbe, came to meet Rav Kook in 1921. He was trying to make peace in Yerushalayim. So he met with Rav Kook, he met with Rav Pesach Frank, he met with the Haredim. And then he wrote a letter after living here. That's a letter from the boat after leaving Eretz Israel. He says, in Chutz La'aretz, we had a different idea about Rav Kook from what he really is. He says, because in Chutz La'aretz, I only heard that he's a koifer, he's an epikoires, that we need to excommunicate him. Now I met him, and I see that he's Isha Eshkolot b'Torah. I see that he's a genius in Torah. In all areas of Torah, Isha Eshkolot means of many areas. Umidot Trumiot. He has the highest personality traits. And many say that he's even Sonne Beitza, even hates money. He says, he says, I met people that are geniuses in Torah. I met people that have good traits. But someone that not only that he hates money, people admits that he hates money. Okay, that's something very, very special. Ulam ahavato leTzion overet kol gvul. He says, the problem with Rav Kook is that his love for Tzion is passing every boundary. Is transgressing any boundary. ואומר על טמא טהור ומראה לו פנים. And that's why he sees what is impure and he says that it's pure. And you know, in a sense, I think that he's right. He's wrong, but he's right. And Rav Kook is right, but wrong, right? Because the question is, on what sphere do you live? And in the practical realm, yes, writing some things about sport is highly dangerous. Highly dangerous. I think that ignoring that, and not only that, also the approval that he gave to the Chalutzim, it's dangerous. And it may lead some of the youth to abandon Torah and mitzvot. I mean, we cannot shut our eyes from what is happening again to this day in our camp. But on a higher realm, less practical, and more ideal, more spiritual, then Rav Kook is completely right. And the question, how can you operate in this world and connect it to these ideas? That's a question that we are struggling with, I think, to this day. And well, there is much what to speak about. I would now go very, very fast. In 1921, he becomes not only the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but the chief rabbi of mandatory Palestine. And that's the chief rabbinut is an institution that he envisioned that would become the new Sanhedrin. That's what he hoped for. Now, the Zionists liked it, very interestingly. Why? Because they believed that that would help them to control the Rabbanim. If you have the Rabbanut Rashit under the auspices of the Zionist movement, that means that you control them. Rav Kook, again, what he believed is that the chief would become the Sanhedrin, the Zionist would become an arm of the Sanhedrin. So again, he believed that he's maybe creating Degel Yerushalayim under different names. Now again, the idea was beautiful, but Rav Kook was not the political man to carry it out. And in the end, Ben-Gurion and his friends completely controlled the Rabbanut Rashit. That has to be said, I think, straight. Now, Rav Kook almost didn't take any, no, I think he didn't take any salary from the Rabbanut Rashit. He lived in poverty. But he believed that that would be able to grow. So now, maybe not now, maybe later. No, I don't want to speak about the Rabbanut Rashit nowadays. And we understand that realizing these ideals is a very, very long and hard process. When the Hebrew University was established in Jerusalem, they asked him to come and speak. And he gave a speech that made everyone angry on him. Because on the one hand, he endorsed the establishment of the university in Jerusalem, which the Haredim saw as complete epikos. It's like a chazir, right, putting his feet into Jerusalem. That's how they saw it. University in Jerusalem. And who spoke for secular knowledge, I mean secular in the sense of general knowledge. However, Rav Kook also warned the people of the Hebrew University they should not teach Tanakh in university because the place for Tanakh and Gemara is in the yeshivot. And he says there would be existence to the university as a Hebrew institution only if it would be accompanied with a Hebrew yeshiva. Otherwise, it won't be Hebrew. So that made all of the Zionists angry about him, because that would mean that there is no such a thing as a non-religious Hebrew Zionist, right? That was the whole project of creating the new Jew. So everyone was angry, but he didn't budge. That's what we believed in. He continued, and in order to have a yeshiva that would accompany, or not accompany, but that would be a counterweight, not in the bad sense, in the positive sense, to the university, he established the Yeshivat Merkaz, which we called the Central World Yeshiva. That was Yeshivat Merkaz. Later it was called, after his death, it was called Yeshivat Merkaz HaRav. But what it is really is הישיבה המרכזית העולמית. Now again, that's his ideas, his dream. In Yerushalayim, you need to have the central yeshiva of the world. In the best days, in his days, there were 80 students in the central yeshiva of the world. But the ideas, and he had a program for the yeshiva. They were supposed to learn philosophy and geography, because again, you need to produce Rabbanim that would be the leaders of the Jewish world with all of its complexion. It was never carried out, this program, no. An ideal. But the yeshiva exists, yes, but not the program learning that he was hoping for, because only very specific men can become a gadol in Torah, and the gadol in philosophy, and the gadol in geography, and the gadol in mathematics. It's not a path to the many. As I say, I have to finish. In 1929, there were the pogroms, Praot, Tarpat, in Yerushalayim, in Hebron, and he was calling on Shabbat to the British Naziv, not the commander, the responsible from the British government in Eretz Israel. Yeah, so he was calling him to send forces, police forces, to save the Jews. And he said, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think his name was Luke or something. Source, yeah, that's right. Scotch told him, so this man told him that he doesn't have the authority to send police to save the Jews. 100 were killed and maimed and raped. It was terrible. And he was doing his best in Shabbat. He was making phone calls. He was signing his names on telegrams. He didn't have to sign his name, but he wanted everyone to understand the severity of the situation. Unfortunately, also the gap within the Jewish people, even inside the Zionist movement, became wider and wider, not only between the Datiim and the non-Datiim, but also between the revisionists, what would later become the right wing, and the socialists, the left wing. And it became almost a brother war when Arlozorov was murdered. That is in 34, I think. In 34, Arlozorov was a leader of the socialists in the Zionist movement, a young man. He was murdered, and 2 Jewish revisionists were accused. And after some time, Rav Kook became convinced. He went through the materials. He became convinced that they were unjustly accused, and he came to their defense. And by that, he lost all of his friends in the socialist camp, basically in the leadership of the Zionist movement. They saw him as a right-winger, and that was one of the most, I guess, worst labels that you could put on someone if you was a socialist in the time. And people wrote pamphlets and put it on the walls of his house that he is a Cohen that defends murderers, because he was defending this Stabensky and Achimeir. In the end, the British court, the lower British court, found one of them, Stabensky, as guilty, and he appealed, and he was cleansed by the highest authority in the British court. However, Rav Kook was so hurt by the way that his former friends from the Zionist movement now related to him. Again, everything was political. Everything to this day is political. And he was not a man of politics. And he was really, really hard. That's all of everything that everyone, the testimonies from the time shows that. And they say, again, that now what I'm saying now is obviously speculation, but it's speculation from that time. And they say that the cancer began at more or less at that time when he was attacked so fiercely. He had a stomach cancer, and in Gimel Elul, Taf Resh Tzadikei, that's the 1st of September, 1935, he passed away at the age of 69. The last address that he gave, I apologize, I will finish in 2 minutes. The last address that he gave on Elul, on this Elul, excuse me, in the last Yamim Noraim that he gave, the Elul before, for Rosh Hashanah, he said there are 3 types of shofar. One is the Mehadrin shofar, and that is the best shofar. The second is a kosher one, but you can still make a bracha on. And the third, if you don't have the first 2, it is still better to make a tkiya in some sort of a shofar, even a pasul. You cannot make a bracha, but at least you hear a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And he says that the best shofar is the shofar of God, is the shofar in which you come to Eretz Israel, the shofar of Geulah, that you come to Eretz Israel because of its holiness, because you believe in the ideas of Am Israel and Eretz Israel and the Torah of Israel. The second level is still a shofar kasher. That is a shofar that may not be so holy, but at least it's a shofar. Its body is a shofar. That's the Zionist movement. If you don't answer to these 2, to the call of these 2 shofarot, then there is a pasul shofar. There is the shofar of the goyim. You do not make a bracha on, but it would force you to move to Eretz Israel. That is in 1935. The Nazis are already in control in Germany, and the clouds are apparent already to everyone in Europe. And that's his last address that he gave, as I said, for the last address for Yamim Noraim. And we may say that it's not only about coming to Eretz Israel, but also his visions of combining these different forces in the Jewish nation. It can be done because we understand holiness. If not that, then unity can at least be achieved because we understand that the body politic would not survive without us being united. If these 2 would not be heeded, then we may unfortunately find ourselves be hearing the shofar pasul coming from the goyim, forcing us to evaluate what is good in the other camps in our nation. And may we hear his words and his calling coming from the holiness, coming from the Kodesh, coming from the light, coming from Orot. Thank you so much. And as I said, Be'ezrat Hashem would reconvene in Elul.